When Bryce Anderson and his friends knocked 14-year-old Esperanza Flores from her wheelchair in the Eagles Peak High School parking lot that October morning, they thought no one was watching, but they were wrong. High up on Thunder Ridge, a legendary black Mustang stallion named Tornado witnessed every cruel laugh, every vicious shove, every moment of humiliation they inflicted on the girl he had been silently protecting for months. What these bullies didn't know was that their cowardly attack would awaken something ancient and fierce in the Montana wilderness. Something that would hunt them down with 1,500 lb of wild fury and remind their small town of Willow Creek that justice sometimes comes thundering from the mountains. This is the story of how a wild horse became a guardian angel, how a girl in a wheelchair discovered her true strength, and how an entire community learned that when you hurt the innocent, you face consequences far beyond anything parents, teachers, or the law could ever deliver. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The October wind carried the scent of pine and early snow across the Montana Valley as Esperanza Flores rolled her wheelchair down the familiar gravel path toward Eagles Peak High School. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, where yellow school buses lined up like sleeping giants. Her breath formed small clouds in the crisp air as she navigated around the potholes that maintenance had promised to fix in September. From her position on Thunder Ridge, nearly 2 miles above the school, a massive black stallion stood motionless among the pine trees. Tornado's ears were pricked forward, his dark eyes fixed on the small figure making her way across the asphalt below. For 3 months now, he had watched this routine, the girl with the wheels instead of legs moving with quiet determination, while others walked past without seeing her struggle over the uneven ground. "Morning, Esperanza," called out Mrs. Patricia Williams as she unlocked the main doors. The school nurse always arrived early, her coffee mug steaming in the cold air. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams. How's your grandson doing with his baseball?" "Oh, you remember that? He made varsity. Can you believe it? 15 years old and already catching for the high school team." Esperanza smiled as she rolled toward the wheelchair ramp. She remembered everyone's stories, their children, their worries. It was easier to focus on other people's lives than think about her own daily challenges. The ramp was slick with morning dew, requiring extra effort to maintain control as she made her way up the incline. Behind her, the rumble of a diesel truck announced the arrival of the Anderson family's red pickup. Bryce Anderson climbed out of the passenger side, his Letterman jacket hanging loose over his broad shoulders. At 16, he commanded attention wherever he went, his sandy hair perfectly styled, his confident swagger drawing admiring glances. "And from underclassmen girls you see that pathetic display?" Bryce muttered to Tyler Reed, who had been riding in the truck bed despite the cold morning air. Tyler jumped down, brushing dust from his jeans. "What display?" "He's trying to act normal. Watch this." Up on Thunder Ridge, the stallion's head lifted sharply. Something in the air had changed. His nostrils flared, detecting the sharp scent of aggression, the chemical signature of predators preparing to strike. His muscles tensed as he watched the 2 larger figures approach the girl. Esperanza had almost reached the main doors when she heard footsteps behind her, heavy boots on concrete moving with purpose. She glanced over her shoulder and saw Bryce and Tyler approaching, their expressions cold and calculating. "Hey there, Wheels," Bryce called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Several students turned to look, sensing drama about to unfold. Esperanza kept moving toward the doors, her hands working the wheelchair rims with practiced efficiency. She had learned long ago that the best defense against bullies was to avoid engagement, to reach safe spaces where teachers could intervene. "I'm talking to you," Bryce said, his tone sharper now. He lengthened his stride, closing the distance. "Leave her alone, Bryce." Ruby Torres emerged from behind the school bus, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was small for a sophomore, but her voice carried an authority that made even upperclassmen pause. "Nobody asked you, Torres. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you're being a jackass to my friend." Tyler laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the brick walls of the school building. "Your friend? You mean your charity case." On Thunder Ridge, the stallion began moving down the mountainside. His hooves found purchase on the rocky terrain as he navigated between pine trees and granite outcroppings. Something primitive and protective drove him forward, an instinct older than human civilization. Esperanza reached for the door handle, but Bryce was faster. He stepped in front of her wheelchair, blocking her path with his body. "Where are you going so fast? We just want to talk." "I need to get to first period," Esperanza said quietly, her hands gripping the wheelchair rims. "Mr. Kim gets upset when students are late." "Mr. Kim can wait," Tyler said, moving to her left side. "We want to know something. How come you get special treatment around here? Ramps, elevators, extra time on tests. Doesn't seem fair to the rest of us." Ruby stepped closer, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "She doesn't get special treatment, you idiots. She gets equal access. There's a difference." "Equal access," Bryce laughed. "She gets driven to school every day by Mommy and Daddy. She gets to skip PE class. She gets her own special bathroom. Sounds like special treatment to me." "She gets driven to school because the bus isn't wheelchair accessible?" Ruby shot back. "She has her own bathroom because regular bathrooms aren't designed for wheelchairs, and she doesn't skip PE. She adapts the activities." "Adapts," Tyler repeated mockingly. "That's just a fancy word for getting out of doing real work." Esperanza felt heat rising in her cheeks. She had heard these accusations before, whispered in hallways and muttered during lunch periods, the assumption that her accommodations were privileges rather than necessities. "I work harder than most students here," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "I have to plan every route through the building. I have to arrive early to avoid crowded hallways. I have to carry extra supplies because I can't reach half the storage areas." "Boo-hoo," Bryce said, stepping even closer. "Poor little Esperanza and her hard life. You know what I think? I think you milked this whole wheelchair thing for attention." The stallion was now halfway down the mountain, his powerful legs carrying him through the forest with surprising speed for such a large animal. Birds scattered from the trees as he passed, sensing the predatory intensity that drove him forward. "Back off, Bryce," Ruby warned, moving protectively in front of Esperanza's wheelchair. "You're way out of line here, am I? Or am I just saying what everyone else is thinking?" A small crowd had gathered now, students drawn by the raised voices and obvious tension. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their feet and avoiding eye contact. Others watched with the morbid fascination of those who enjoyed watching others suffer. "Nobody's thinking that except you and your brain-dead sidekick," Ruby snapped. "Who are you calling brain-dead, you little—" "Hey!" The sharp voice of Coach Bradley cut through the morning air. The athletics instructor jogged toward them from the faculty parking lot, his whistle bouncing against his chest. "What's going on here?" "Nothing, Coach," Bryce said smoothly, his demeanor shifting instantly to respectful student mode. "Just having a conversation with some classmates." Coach Bradley looked around the group, taking in the tension, the protective stance Ruby had taken in front of Esperanza, the uncomfortable expressions on the bystanders' faces. "Conversation looks pretty heated from where I'm standing. Everyone needs to get inside. Bell rings in 5 minutes. "Yes, sir," Bryce said, stepping back from Esperanza's wheelchair. But as he moved away, he leaned down close to her ear. "This isn't over, Wheels. You and your little girlfriend need to learn some respect." The crowd began to disperse as Coach Bradley supervised the movement toward the building. Ruby stayed close to Esperanza as they made their way through the doors, both girls silent as they processed what had just happened. In her first period science class, Esperanza tried to focus on Mr. Kim's lecture about atmospheric pressure, but her mind kept drifting to the encounter in the parking lot. She had dealt with subtle discrimination before, the stares and whispered comments that followed her through hallways. But Bryce's aggression felt different, more personal and threatening. "Miss Flores," Mr. Kim called out, startling her from her thoughts. "Can you tell us what happens when a low-pressure system moves through mountainous terrain?" "The air rises," she answered automatically. "As it hits the mountains, it cools and condenses, often forming clouds and precipitation on the windward side." "Excellent. And what do we call the phenomenon that occurs on the leeward side?" "Rain shadow effect. The air descends and warms, creating drier conditions." Mr. Kim nodded approvingly and continued his lecture. Esperanza allowed herself a small smile. Whatever challenges she faced, socially, academically, she was more than capable of holding her own. Outside, tornado had reached the base of Thunder Ridge. The school was still over a mile away, but he could smell the scents carried on the wind. Fear, anger, and something else. The metallic tang of cruelty that made his muscles quiver with barely contained energy. During lunch period, Esperanza sat with Ruby and a few other friends at their usual table near the windows. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation and the clatter of trays, but she noticed how students at nearby tables kept glancing in her direction. "They're all talking about this morning," Ruby said quietly, following her gaze. "Let them talk," Esperanza replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Bryce Anderson is such a tool," said Josh Turner, a quiet junior who occasionally joined their lunch group. "My little sister says he picks on 6th graders, too. Guy's got serious problems. His problems don't give him the right to take them out on other people," Ruby said fiercely. Across the cafeteria, Bryce sat with the football team, regaling them with an exaggerated version of the morning's events. His gestures grew more animated as he described Esperanza's supposed helplessness, earning laughs from his teammates. "Look at her over there," he said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear, acting all tragic and misunderstood. "I bet she loves the attention." Several students looked uncomfortable with his commentary, but none spoke up to challenge him. The social hierarchy of high school was a powerful force, and few were willing to risk their own standing to defend someone they barely knew. As the lunch period ended, Esperanza made her way toward her locker. navigating the crowded hallways with practiced skill. She had just reached her combination lock when she felt a presence behind her. "We need to finish our conversation from this morning." Bryce's voice was low and menacing. Esperanza's hands stilled on the lock dial. Around them, students hurried to their next classes, too focused on their own concerns to notice the confrontation developing. "There's nothing to finish," she said without turning around. "I think there is. See, you and your friend embarrassed me in front of half the school. That doesn't sit well with me." "Then maybe you shouldn't have been acting like a bully." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. She had never been confrontational, had always chosen the path of least resistance. But something about Bryce's entitled attitude sparked a rebellion in her that surprised them both. Bryce stepped closer, his presence looming over her wheelchair. "What did you just call me?" "You heard me." On Thunder Ridge, now empty of its guardian, the wind howled through the pine trees. Far below, in the halls of Eagles Peak High School, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The Black Stallion continued his descent toward the valley, driven by instincts he couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. The bell for fifth period rang, but neither Bryce nor Esperanza moved toward their classrooms. The hallway emptied around them, leaving them alone in a space that suddenly felt charged with tension and possibility. "You're going to regret those words," Bryce said softly. But as he spoke, a distant sound drifted through the open windows, the thunder of hooves on stone, growing closer with each passing moment. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing through the valley like distant thunder. Esperanza's heart hammered in her chest as Bryce leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. The empty hallway stretched before them, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel more threatening. "You think you're so smart with your clever comebacks," Bryce whispered. "But you're just a broken little girl who needs special help with everything." "I'm not broken." The words came out stronger than Esperanza felt. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her wheelchair rims. "No? Then prove it. Get out of that chair and walk to your next class." The cruelty in his voice made her stomach clench. She had heard variations of this taunt before, but never delivered with such venom. Bryce straightened up, crossing his arms as if he had just delivered a devastating argument. "That's what I thought. You can't, because you're defective." The hoofbeats stopped. Somewhere outside, Tornado had reached the edge of the school property. His massive head lifted, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of his protected one's distress. The stallion's eyes were wild, primal instincts overriding 3 million years of evolution that should have made him flee from human settlements. "Esperanza!" Ruby's voice carried down the hallway. She had noticed her friend's absence from biology class and come looking for her. Bryce stepped back slightly, but his posture remained aggressive. "This isn't finished, Wheels. Not by a long shot." Ruby jogged toward them, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. "What's going on here? Why aren't you guys in class?" "Just having a friendly chat," Bryce said, his tone shifting to mock innocence. "Esperanza was just telling me how much she appreciates all the special treatment she gets around here." "I never said that," Esperanza protested. "Sure you did, right before you called me a bully." Bryce's smile was cold and calculating. Seems like someone needs to learn some respect. Ruby positioned herself between them, her small frame dwarfed by Bryce's bulk, but her stance unwavering. The only person who needs to learn respect is you, Anderson. Leave her alone. Or what? You'll report me to the principal? Tell on me like a little tattletale? If that's what it takes. Bryce laughed, but there was no humor in it. Go ahead. See how far that gets you. My dad donates more money to this school than your parents make in a year. Who do you think they're going to believe? The truth of his words hung in the air like poison. Robert Anderson owned the largest construction company in 3 counties. His name was on the gymnasium, the computer lab, and the new science wing. His influence extended far beyond financial contributions. Money doesn't make you right, Ruby said quietly. Maybe not, but it makes me untouchable. From outside came a sound that made all 3 students freeze, a high, piercing whinny that seemed to carry impossible distances. It was followed by the sharp crack of splintering wood, as if something large had just broken through a fence. What the hell was that? Tyler Reed appeared at the end of the hallway, having finally noticed his friend's absence from their shared math class. Sounded like a horse, Ruby said, moving to the window. But there aren't any stables near the school. Esperanza felt a strange chill run down her spine. She had grown up around horses, spent countless hours at her uncle's ranch. That wasn't the sound of a domestic animal. It was wild, untamed, and very, very angry. Probably just some old nag that got loose from the Patterson farm, Bryce said dismissively. Anyway, we're done here for now. He turned to leave, Tyler falling into step beside him. But as they walked away, Bryce called back over his shoulder. Think about what I said, Wheels, about proving yourself. Maybe it's time you stopped hiding behind that chair. The 2 boys disappeared around the corner, their laughter fading into the distance. Ruby immediately turned to Esperanza, her face creased with concern. Are you okay? What did he say to you? The usual garbage. That I'm faking. That I get special treatment. That I'm... Esperanza's voice caught. That I'm broken. Ruby's eyes flashed with fury. You're not broken. You're the strongest person I know. You get up every day and face idiots like him with more grace than they deserve. Sometimes I don't feel strong. Sometimes I feel exactly like what he said. Defective. Don't you dare let him get in your head like that. Bryce Anderson is everything wrong with this place. He thinks his daddy's money makes him king of the world. Another sound from outside interrupted them. Not hooves this time, but the slam of car doors and raised voices. Through the window, they could see several pickup trucks pulling into the faculty parking lot. Men in work clothes and cowboy hats climbed out, their faces grim and purposeful. That's Sheriff Rodriguez, Ruby said, recognizing the lead figure. And that's Tom Bradley's dad and Pete Sullivan. What are they doing here? Esperanza wheeled closer to the window. She recognized most of the men as local ranchers and horse handlers. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had worked together before, checking equipment and speaking in low, urgent tones. Something's wrong, she murmured. Principal Walsh emerged from the main office, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. She spoke briefly with Sheriff Rodriguez, her gestures animated and concerned. Even from a distance, it was clear she was agitated about something. We should get to class, Ruby said reluctantly. Whatever's happening out there, it's not our problem. But Esperanza couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to her somehow. The timing seemed too coincidental. The strange behavior of the men, the wild horse cry they had heard, the sense of electricity in the air that made her skin prickle with awareness. In her afternoon English class, Esperanza tried to focus on Ms. Lopez's discussion of symbolism in literature, but her attention kept drifting to the windows. The parking lot was visible from her seat, and she could see more vehicles arriving, a horse trailer, several men on horseback, and what looked like tranquilizer equipment. "Miss Flores," Ms. Lopez called out, "can you give us an example of a symbol that represents protection in the novel we're reading?" "The mockingbird," Esperanza answered automatically. "It represents innocence and the idea that something should be protected rather than destroyed." "Excellent. And why do you think Harper Lee chose that particular symbol?" "Because mockingbirds don't harm anyone. They just sing and bring beauty to the world. Killing them would be a sin because they're defenseless." Ms. Lopez nodded approvingly, but Esperanza barely heard her response. Outside, she could see Sheriff Rodriguez pointing toward Thunder Ridge, his expression serious as he spoke to the assembled men. The final bell of the day couldn't come soon enough. As students streamed out of Eagles Peak High School, Esperanza made her way toward the wheelchair-accessible exit, avoiding the main doors where crowds of teenagers pushed and shoved their way to freedom. She had almost reached her father's truck when she heard Tyler Reed's voice behind her. "Hey, Wheels, wait up!" Esperanza's blood ran cold. She looked around for Ruby, but her friend had already been picked up by her grandmother for a dentist appointment. The parking lot was busy with dismissal activity, but no one seemed to be paying attention to her situation. Tyler jogged up beside her, slightly out of breath. "Bryce wants to talk to you." "I have nothing to say to Bryce." "Yeah. Well, he has something to say to you, and trust me, you want to hear this. It's about your little performance this morning." "What performance?" "The whole Wounded Victim Act. Bryce thinks you need to learn what real hardship looks like." Esperanza's hands trembled as she gripped her wheelchair rims. "Where is he?" "Behind the gym, away from all the teachers and goody two-shoes who might interfere." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to get in her father's truck and go home. But another part of her, the part that had been building anger all day, wanted to face Bryce Anderson once and for all. "Fine," she said, "but this ends today. Whatever his problem is with me, we settle it now." Tyler's grin was wolfish. "Oh, it'll be settled all right." They made their way around the building, past the football field and the maintenance sheds. The area behind the gymnasium was isolated, hidden from view by large dumpsters and emergency equipment. Bryce was waiting there with two other football players Esperanza didn't recognize. "Look who decided to show up," Bryce said as they approached. "I wasn't sure you'd have the guts." "What do you want, Bryce?" "I want you to understand something. This school, this town, it has a natural order. People like me, we're at the top because we've earned it. We're strong. We're capable. We don't need special help with everything. And people like you are supposed to know their place. But lately you've been getting ideas above your station, walking around like you belong here. Like you're just as good as everyone else." The cruelty in his words hit her like a physical blow. But beneath the hurt, Esperanza felt something else stirring. A fire that had been building all day, fed by every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment of being treated as less than human. "I do belong here," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I belong here just as much as you do." "Do you? Let's test that theory." Bryce stepped forward and, without warning, grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. With a sharp jerk, he tilted it backward. Esperanza's arms flew out for balance as the chair teetered on its back wheels. "Stop!" she gasped, but Bryce only laughed. "What's wrong? I thought you said you belonged here. Prove it. Get up and walk away." The chair tilted further back. Esperanza could feel herself starting to slide, her grip on the armrests slipping as gravity pulled her toward the concrete. That was when they heard it, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. A rumbling that grew louder and more menacing with each passing second, the thunder of hooves, moving fast and getting closer. "What the hell?" one of the unnamed football players said, looking around nervously. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the sharp whistle of wind and the crack of branches breaking. Something was coming through the forest that bordered the school property, something large and moving with deadly purpose. Bryce's grip on the wheelchair handles loosened slightly as he tried to locate the source of the noise. It was the opening Esperanza needed. She threw her weight forward, bringing the chair down on all four wheels, with a jarring impact. The thundering grew closer through the trees at the edge of the school property. They could see movement, large, dark shapes moving between the trunks with predatory grace. "We should get out of here," Tyler said, his voice tight with nervous energy. But it was too late. The forest exploded with motion as Tornado burst through the tree line. His massive frame was silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. The stallion's eyes were wild. His nostrils flared, and every muscle in his powerful body was tensed for violence. Behind him came Sheriff Rodriguez and three other men on horseback, their faces grim as they tried to keep pace with the enraged Mustang. "Nobody move!" the sheriff shouted. "That horse is extremely agitated." But Tornado wasn't looking at the sheriff or his men. His dark eyes were fixed on the group behind the gymnasium, specifically on the boy who still had his hands on Esperanza's wheelchair. The stallion's head lowered, his ears pinned back against his skull. A sound rumbled from deep in his chest, part whinny and part growl, a noise that spoke of ancient rage and protective fury. For the first time since Esperanza had known him, Bryce Anderson looked genuinely afraid. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Tornado stood 30 yards away, his massive chest heaving with each breath, his dark coat glistening with sweat from his desperate race down the mountain. The stallion's gaze never wavered from Bryce's hands, still gripping Esperanza's wheelchair. Sheriff Rodriguez dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. Behind him, the other horsemen spread out in a loose semicircle, blocking potential escape routes while keeping their distance from the agitated Mustang. "Son, I need you to step away from the girl," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. "Real slow and easy." Bryce's face had gone pale, but his grip on the wheelchair remained tight, pride warring with fear as he processed the impossibility of the situation. Wild horses didn't behave this way. They didn't track down specific humans. They didn't show up at schools like some kind of avenging spirit. "This is insane," he muttered. "It's just a horse." Tornado snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a locomotive. His front hoof pounded the ground, leaving deep gouges in the earth. The message was clear, even to someone with no experience around horses. This was a warning. "That's no ordinary horse," Pete Sullivan said quietly, his weathered hands steady on his reins. "That's the Thunder Ridge stallion. Been free up there for near 15 years. Never came down to human settlements before. Not once." "Why now?" Sheriff Rodriguez asked, though his eyes never left the unfolding confrontation. Pete studied the scene, taking in Esperanza's frightened expression, Bryce's aggressive posture, the obvious tension between them. "Something's got him riled up. Horses got instincts about these things. They can sense when something ain't right." Tyler and the other football players had backed away, putting distance between themselves and the increasingly volatile situation. Their earlier bravado had evaporated in the face of genuine danger. "Bryce," Tyler called out, his voice shaky. "Just let her go, man. This is getting crazy." But Bryce seemed frozen, caught between his need to maintain dominance and his growing awareness that he was in over his head. The wheelchair felt like an anchor in his hands, connecting him to a situation he couldn't control or understand. Esperanza could feel the tension in his grip, the way his fingers tightened and loosened as he wrestled with indecision. She had never been this close to something truly wild before. Tornado's presence filled the air with an energy that made her skin prickle with electricity. "He's protecting me," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "What?" Bryce's voice cracked slightly. "The horse. He's been watching me all this time. He's been watching out for me." The truth of it settled in her bones with absolute certainty. The sounds they had heard during the day, the timing of his appearance, the focused intensity of his attention. This magnificent creature had somehow appointed himself as her guardian. Tornado took a step forward, then another. His movements were fluid despite his size, each hoof placement calculated and purposeful. Sheriff Rodriguez tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the tranquilizer gun attached to his saddle. "Nobody make any sudden moves," he commanded. "That stallion could kill someone if he charges." "He won't hurt me," Esperanza said with quiet conviction. "He's not here for me." As if responding to her words, Tornado's attention shifted fully to Bryce. The stallion's head lowered until his eyes were level with the teenager's face. The intelligence there was unmistakable, along with something far more dangerous: judgment. Bryce's hands began to shake. Whatever power he had derived from his size, his social status, his family's wealth, it meant nothing to this creature. Tornado saw him for exactly what he was: a predator, threatening something under the stallion's protection. "Let her go." The voice belonged to Ruby, who had appeared at the edge of the scene with several other students. Word was spreading through the school about the confrontation behind the gymnasium, drawing curious onlookers despite the obvious danger. "Ruby, stay back," Esperanza called out. "Don't get any closer. I'm not leaving you alone with him." "The situation is under control," Sheriff Rodriguez announced, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Everyone needs to clear the area immediately." But the crowd continued to grow. Teachers emerged from the school building, drawn by the commotion and the sight of mounted men on school property. Principal Walsh appeared with Coach Bradley, both looking bewildered by the surreal scene unfolding behind their institution. "What in God's name is happening here?" Walsh demanded. "Wild stallion came down from Thunder Ridge," Pete Sullivan explained. "Seems to have taken an interest in your students." Coach Bradley studied the tableau with the eye of someone who had spent years managing teenage conflicts. The positioning, the body language, the obvious fear radiating from the football players. "This isn't about the horse," he said slowly. "This is about what was happening before the horse showed up." Principal Walsh followed his gaze to where Bryce still gripped Esperanza's wheelchair, to the girl's frightened expression, to the guilty faces of the other boys. Understanding dawned across her features, like sunrise. "Mr. Anderson, release that wheelchair immediately." "I can't," Bryce said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I let go, that thing might charge. That thing, as you call it, wouldn't be here if you hadn't been terrorizing Miss Flores." The accusation hung in the air like smoke around the growing crowd. Students and teachers began to piece together the situation. The star football player, the girl in the wheelchair, the wild horse that had somehow sensed trouble and come running. Tornado took another step forward. His breath misted in the cool afternoon air as he studied Bryce with the patience of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The stallion's muscles rippled beneath his dark coat, power held in check by intelligence and purpose. "Please," Esperanza said softly, "just let me go. This doesn't have to get worse." For a moment, something human flickered in Bryce's eyes. Recognition of how far he had pushed things, of how badly he had misjudged the situation. But then his jaw tightened with familiar stubbornness. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to be intimidated by some overgrown pony." The words were barely out of his mouth when Tornado exploded into motion. Not a charge, but a display of power that made the earth shake beneath their feet. The stallion reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves slashing the air inches from Bryce's face. The sound of his whinnies split the afternoon like a battle cry. Bryce stumbled backward, his hands finally releasing their grip on the wheelchair. Esperanza rolled forward, putting distance between herself and her tormentor as chaos erupted around them. Students screamed and scattered. Teachers shouted orders that no one followed. Sheriff Rodriguez spurred his horse forward, trying to position himself between Tornado and the crowd of panicking teenagers. But Tornado wasn't pursuing. Having made his point, the stallion settled back on all fours and turned his attention to Esperanza. His approach was gentle now, almost tentative, as if he understood the difference between threatening predators and protecting the innocent. "Easy, boy," Esperanza whispered, extending her hand, palm up in the universal gesture of peace. "Easy." Tornado's massive head lowered until his muzzle was inches from her palm. His breath was warm against her skin as he investigated her scent, confirming what his instincts had already told him. This was his charge, his responsibility, his protected one. The contact lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. In that brief moment, Esperanza felt a connection to something wild and free, something that had chosen to care about her welfare when the human world had failed her. "Incredible," Dr. Sarah Thompson breathed from her position near the crowd. The veterinarian had arrived with the rescue team, expecting to tranquilize a dangerous animal. Instead, she was witnessing something that challenged everything she knew about equine behavior. "I've never seen anything like it," Pete Sullivan agreed. "That horse bonded with her somehow. Doesn't make sense. But there it is." Sheriff Rodriguez kept his weapon ready, but made no move to use it. The situation had stabilized for the moment, but he knew how quickly things could turn deadly with a wild animal involved. Bryce had backed away to where his friends waited, his face a mixture of humiliation and rage. The confrontation hadn't gone as planned. Instead of establishing his dominance, he had been reduced to cowering before a horse while half the school watched. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked their earlier venom. "You can't have that thing following you around forever." "Maybe not," Esperanza replied, her confidence strengthened by Tornado's presence. "But he's here now, and everyone saw what happened when you tried to hurt me." The truth of it rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Cell phones emerged, capturing photos and videos that would be shared across social media within minutes. The story would spread beyond Eagles Peak High School, beyond Willow Creek, carrying with it a message about consequences and protection that no one would soon forget. Principal Walsh stepped forward, her administrative training finally catching up with the unprecedented situation. "Everyone needs to return to the building immediately. We're going into lockdown until this situation is resolved." "What about the girl?" Coach Bradley asked, nodding toward Esperanza. "She stays right where she is," Sheriff Rodriguez decided. "That horse is calm as long as she's safe. We don't want to upset that balance." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Ruby lingered at the edge of the safe zone. "Esperanza, are you okay?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "What happens now?" Esperanza looked up at Tornado, who had positioned himself between her and the school building like a living barrier. The stallion's ears were pricked forward, alert for any sign of renewed threat. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm not afraid anymore." The words carried a weight that surprised her. For years, she had navigated the world with careful calculation, avoiding confrontation, accepting lesser treatment rather than risking conflict. But something had changed in the span of an afternoon. Something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of her own worth and her right to occupy space in the world. "The horse can't stay here indefinitely," Principal Walsh said to Sheriff Rodriguez. "This is a school, not a wildlife sanctuary." "I know that, but forcing him to leave could trigger another episode. We need to handle this carefully." Dr. Thompson approached with a tranquilizer rifle, her movements slow and non-threatening. "I can sedate him if necessary, but I'd prefer to find a way to encourage him to leave on his own." "He'll leave when he's ready," Pete Sullivan said with the certainty of someone who had spent decades working with horses. "When he's satisfied that she's safe." "And when will that be?" Pete studied Tornado's alert posture, the way his attention shifted constantly between Esperanza and the school building. "When those boys understand that hurting her has consequences, real consequences." As if responding to his words, Tornado lifted his head and fixed his gaze on the building where Bryce and his friends had taken refuge. The message was clear. He was watching. He was waiting. And he would not forget. The standoff had begun, and nobody knew how it would end. 2 hours had passed since the initial confrontation, and Tornado showed no signs of leaving. The stallion had settled into a protective stance, 20 feet from where Esperanza